panel. Today it is June 10th, and we are here talking about getting into marriage and sometimes getting out of marriage. So we have our upcoming panel. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves as we go around. So to start with, I'll start with Tracy. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, good afternoon, actually, everybody. I'm Tracy Spiaggia with Slingshot Health Coaching. I'm a functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner and brain health specialist, working with individuals and families struggling with myriad health issues, but I specialize in and really hit my rhythm working with people struggling with mental health challenges. And the focus I take with all of my clients is really the restoration of the relationships inside the family unit, understanding and appreciating that all health, individual, familial, relational, societal health originates really from the home.
Excellent. And Derek, do you want to explain to the audience who you are and what you do, sir?
Sure, thank you so much. My name is Derek Bausik. I am a certified mediator in family law, and I've done high conflict mediation for over a decade. And I currently teach co-parenting classes in Boise, Idaho, specifically for parents that are going through separation proceedings or custody proceedings with minor children, and more or less to aid them in learning how to improve their communication skills, to weed out any kind of habits they may have picked up from the court during their proceeding, and to try to make it as smooth a process as possible for both them and their children involved for the next chapter in their lives. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Excellent. And finally, we have Janet. Janet, you're muted right now. Do you want to introduce yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Janet Seitlin. I too am a family mediator. I don't do family mediations anymore. Quite bluntly, it wore me out. But I did it for many years, and I did it with a partner, and I wasn't going to show you this, but this is my partner, Mark Schussheim. And Mark was a psychiatric social worker, but this is what he looked like in his everyday business. And I learned a lot from Mark about what goes on with people when they go through divorce. And over the course of my career, I am an attorney, but I don't practice law for 35 plus years. I've been a full-time mediator, both in civil and in family court. And at this point, the bulk of my mediations are civil. But I learned a lot about divorce, and I had the good fortune of coming from a good family that had a lot of discomfort, but everybody held together and loved each other, and we found ways to work through it. And I actually have an aversion to divorce and to conflict, and I felt that maybe from my perspective, I might be able to help people as they go through it. And I've learned a lot about how to help people through the unraveling of their relationship. Everything that everybody said holds true for going through divorce as well as committing to marriage. You know, the concepts of trust, the concepts, of being able to be wholly yourself as well as part of a team. But the sad reality that I learned from my partner, Mark, is that sometimes marriage is just the first stage of divorce. And you have to help people walk through why the relationship happened and then what happened to make it go wrong, and what the healthiest way is to help people move to their next level. Our goal is always ultimately perhaps the ending of that relationship, but if they have children, and certainly if they have children, to maintain a different level of relationship that's good enough that they can work together with their kids long after the divorce is over. They can attend marriages and birthdays and be in the same room with each other without this angst around them. And so ultimately our goal is not just to end the financial and the superficial ties, it's the death of a small civilization. So you have to work through all of the other things that also need attention, just as all these other people have mentioned.
And what would you say are some of the key factors that you find to don't want to say have a successful, but to have a successful separation or dissolution of a marriage situation?
I think the concept of health is also an underlying thing. You can have a healthy divorce even if you couldn't have a healthy marriage. And so a lot of it is taking stock of what, I mean, the first question always is, what is important for you? What's important for each person? And how is it, where do you need to go? I mean, the decision making with people in divorce, everything they have to decide has significant effect, and they've got 5 or 10 different things to make decisions on: their finances, what happens with the children, what happens with the house, what happens with the business. All of those, each one individually, is a great deal of angst. And then you combine them together, and really they're shell-shocked. Divorce is good people in a bad place most of the time. And so what you're really there is kind of holding them up like a float and just helping them get where they need to go.
Excellent.
So I don't know what advice I can give you in 10 seconds, but it's really about understanding these are human beings, understanding they may have entered the marriage with the best of intentions, and understanding they don't have to end in acrimony, that they can move on, they can recognize we're 2 healthy beings and it didn't work, but now we can go on and do something different, and we can be it's civil with each other. I've saved people millions of dollars once they finally figured that part out.
Excellent. And Derek, switching over to you, do you want to kind of explain in your insights what you feel in this topic is important to discuss?
Sure. Well, thank you. I think the biggest thing, once again, is communication. You know, what it really breaks down to, at least from what I see on a day-to-day basis, is there is an idea or a concept or expectations that 2 individuals have of one another. And unfortunately, what generally happens is their expectations are not communicated to one another. So we have 2 people who are basically concurrently engaging in a marriage or the dissolution of a marriage or the next step, without really talking with one another as to what their hopes are, their wants are, their needs are. And a lot of that stems from a multitude of things. It could be expectations placed upon them by other family members, by, you know, the demographic they live in, socioeconomic expectations, their children for that matter, depending on the age. There's a lot of factors that goes into it. But, you know, I'd really touch on what Janet was referring to, and also what Tracy was referring to, and that so much of what goes on, you know, it's less legal and more mental health. You know, I'm lucky enough to where I work, there's a number of mental health care professionals staffed in our family court services department. And if I had it my way, it would be required nationwide to have mental health care professionals in family court services and any court services for that matter, because going back to what was discussed with regard to trauma, divorce in a way, depending on the situation, is a very traumatic event. And if there is an individual or 2 individuals who are experiencing that, they need to process it. And, you know, what we do, or at least what I do, my approach to both the mediation services that I provide and the co-coaching that I provide, is to try to keep the legalities as far away as possible from the conversation and really get to the heart of what it is these 2 individuals want. Because inevitably, if they have children, they have to co-parent. And so a massive part of what we also do is allow the parties to reframe one another in a new perspective or in a new light. And we provide sessions to give them the opportunity to define what that role looks like as the co-parent. You'll have to forgive me, a truck is passing by where I live, so it's a little bit noisy. But yeah, you know, I mean, that's really what we focus on. And, you know, aside from that, I could go, you know, for hours as to the little details. But one thing that I think falls at the epicenter, of course, is really discussing something called the narrative, the personal narrative, the justification for what's going on and why it's going on. And as much as possible, I try to remove guilt, shame, and blame from the discussion with regard to separation, because it's otherwise, you know, a very natural end to a relationship. and parties should not feel the additional emotional burden or social stigma that too often is placed in these situations. So I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry, I kind of went off there.
No, without a doubt. A follow-up question on that. What do you recommend, and I can't even imagine what to do, when one party's kind of on board with your program and the other party isn't? How do you address that?
When you're referring to being on board with the program, are you referring to basically trying to work together in a civil manner to?
Exactly. You as the media going, yeah, this one gets it, not so much this one. How can we go this one up?
That's the whole purpose of mediation. That's the whole job of the mediator. Derek will tell you that's exactly. They walk in at an impasse, so that's always what we have to deal with, right?
Janet's completely 100% correct on that. But you know what I do, a few things. The first of which is there's a method called caucusing where you work with the parties one-on-one. Sometimes parties feel very tense, they feel very guarded, which is natural because if they've been in litigation, it's, this horrid power and attack, fight or flight mode that we have to get them out of. So we try caucusing. If that still doesn't work, if I have some very stubborn individuals, I play the fun game of what's the alternative, which is you go before a judicial officer or a magistrate, or you spend more money on attorney's fees and you just create further conflict. But and I'm not just saying this, but generally speaking, once parties are able to express why they are stonewalling the process, and 9 times out of 10, it's because they feel wronged, that simple act of just active listening really does make a difference. Because for many, they've never been heard either in the process of their divorce or for some in the process of their marriage. And this is the first time they're getting an opportunity to really present what's going on. But yeah, that's pretty usually when I do the pros and cons list between working out things in mediation as opposed to going to court and running through the timeline, the numbers, the stress factors and everything else, people are a little bit more inclined to at the very least try and go from there. Janet, would you agree on that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's interesting. One reason I worked with Mark, he was, first of all, the combination of the lawyer and the social worker, because I knew there were many, many, many things going on between those two people that I had no concept of. I was trained to do the agenda. Let's talk about the house. Let's talk about the car. Let's talk about the debts. And what Mark would do is he'd sit there and he'd watch their eyes. And he'd watch there. And I will always remember we had one guy who came in wearing dark glasses, and we were there to talk about child time with his child. And his little boy was like 3 years old. And he walked in and it was like this, and with the dark glasses and looking very intimidating. And when we talked to him privately in caucus, what Derek was referring to, Mark asked him if the light was too bright out there. And the guy said no. And Mark asked him if he could remove his glasses, and he didn't want to. So we just continued talking. And what came out was he said, "It breaks my heart not to be there to see my son take his first steps, to see my son do this." And he reached under the glasses and he went like this. And it became obvious where the intimidation and the image was coming from. It wasn't, I'm big and I'm mean. It's I'm small and I'm fragile. And that's what these people are. They're very fragile and they need simply support. And so not only was it the therapist and the lawyer that worked, it was the man and the woman that also worked in walking them through. So everybody felt safe enough that they could go through it and they knew somebody was holding their hands. That's all we can do in mediation. We can't, sometimes the beginning of a mediation is to determine, is this really a divorce? Or will counseling help you? So before we'd ever start a divorce mediation, if they didn't have lawyers, we would always make sure, where are you? And once it was clear, and one person said it's a divorce, and the other one said, let's keep going, we kept talking with them until finally both of them agreed one way or the other. Only then could we then move them to the next step. So there's a lot of emotional undercurrent that totally drives all of this.
Understood. And now we're going to get over to Tracy, who's going to talk more about helping families to avoid having to get to this point. So Tracy, you want to highlight a little bit about what you do to help in that area?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's wonderful always to be on these panels with people who are so impassioned about the same things that I am. You know, the work that I do is in the realm of functional medicine. I'm not sure if the audience is familiar with that, but we have our typical allopathic Western medicine where something hurts and you get a surgery or a pill. Functional medicine is really pulling the lens back on that particular person and really examining the full breadth of their entire life story and trying to get to the root cause of whatever the symptoms that they're presenting with. And I find a lot of this conversation here is doing much of the same. It's almost like functional marriage or functional divorce or functionally relating to one another. It's panning back. So, you know, when I really resonate so much with Pastor Dan, because I practice when a client is agreeable, I integrate spirituality into it, and I understand marriage to be the holiest relationship on the planet. And inside that relationship is where we have the potential, if we're willing to yield self, we have the potential to really be refined into the most beautiful version of ourselves. If we continue to lay down ego and lay down pride and just allow the beautiful refining work of God to do what he's famous for in that institution of marriage. And then when children are born from that, they have this grand opportunity to witness this sanctification process, this perfecting process within the safety of this beautiful home environment. Now, tragically, that is not the case for more than half of the people on the planet. Divorce rate still kind of hangs around 50%. That's inside and outside the church community, which is really quite heartbreaking. But as we navigate into modern day culture, you know, the undercurrent narrative is, if it's hard, it's not worth doing. And that, to me, is one of the most destructive messages that we could possibly communicate to our youth, that if something is hard, you ought to pivot and do something else, because it's inside the challenge, it's inside the hard, the good hard, that we are refined, that we are shaped, that we lose those selfish bits on ourselves and we become more selfless. And inside that family unit really is ideally a training ground to be launched into society as a selfless person looking for grand opportunities to help others and to give your love, your talents, your gifts. I love, somebody said, time, treasure, talent away. That's really the whole reason that we're here. And unfortunately, when we're not raised in a home environment that trains up children to go out into the world, not with a self-focus, but really with an others focus, what happens is society begins to unravel. People walk away from things that are hard. I understand that very often people are inside circumstances that divorce is the only option, but the reason that they're in those circumstances in the first place is because the parents before them didn't really create that home environment that trained them up to be these whole, like really well contributing members of society with an intact self-image, and who is willing to kind of grit in and do the hard work that comes with loving other people. So, you know, disease manifests most often as a result of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs they're called, and divorce is one of the top traumas that a person can experience, most especially a child. And when a child experiences a divorce, whether amicable or not, it still is a great trauma that informs their autonomic nervous system to be on high alert because they perceive that they are unsafe. So, you know, then disease ensues if that trauma is not brought to a really healthy conclusion. And now you launch another person into society from another broken home with a broken idea of what it is to be human, and they go out with their guard up. They either go out, and men typically bring their anger to on the outside, and they perpetuate violence and abuse, where women tend to turn their anger inward, and now they suffer horrific autoimmune diseases like fibromyalgia, because anger has to go somewhere. And I really believe that all of society's ills really have their roots in dysfunctional homes, and dysfunctional homes have their roots in a straying away from the precepts of God, because he told us exactly how to live if we want to live with joy and with purpose and with meaning. But as we drift away from that one grand truth, we try to be, we just try to navigate a really hostile, volatile world with a very limited toolbox. And unfortunately it brings, dis-ease of all kinds in the body, but also in relationships and out into the world. So that's why I'm so passionate about equipping parents and helping them understand that you have the potential to stop generational cursing. You have the potential alone to say that way of living stops with me, and I can hold back the tide of past generations that were broken, and I can live a different way. I can create a home that's different from my home when I was a child, and I can really put on display the grandiosity of God and the power of God when I say, you know what, I know this is how I was raised and this is what was modeled for me, but I'm going to choose something different, and I'm going to create a home environment that's safe for my child and my children, so that they can understand on a cellular level that they are safe, that they are valued, that they are worthy, that they have meaning, that they have purpose, and that they are loved. And that's really the work I do.
Excellent. So final question for everyone across the panel is, in 2 minutes or less, what is the one thing that you want people to take away from our conversation here today with you? And we'll start with Janet. You're muted, Janet.
I don't think that fast. I think it's important that healthy choice is always at the bottom of whether you're going into a marriage or whether you're not, whether you're getting out of it, is always make the healthiest possible choices. Because if you do, you always, and you may not like your choices, but you always have them. And if you always pick the healthier of the two, and one always is a little bit better, then each set of choices is only going to get better. And so substance is going to fall into individual places. I think an overall thing is just always try to think about your healthiest possible alternatives and options.
Thank you so much. Derek, what is your thought on that in 2 minutes or less?
Please communicate. Talk, have conversation. If there's one thing that I'd want anyone to take away from what I've said, it's that there's already enough pressure and enough narrative from third parties or outside sources that would tell you what to do or what not to do, or how to feel or how to think, or how to go about something that's very personal to your life. And the only opinions that matter in this particular situation are yours and your partner's. So please, if there is something to be discussed, talk about it. Inevitably, it will be discussed, but better to begin the conversation in a healthy, organic manner if you can. And if that is not an option, before going to drastic measures such as filing a lawsuit or going to court, see what other services are out there. This entire panel is wonderful in the sense that there are so many facets to being in a marriage, to having to dissolve a marriage, that do not necessarily require legality. So please take a look around at local community resources, but more importantly, go back to the basics with communication and try, if you can, to diminish the expectations and just talk.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And finally, Tracy, you can tell us.
I guess if I had to choose just one, I would say that no matter where you are in the process, it's never too late to grow. It's never too late to pivot and to interact in a new way, to behave a new way, to experience a certain person or relationship in a new way. That healing is always available, and that love is the strongest force on the planet, and all you have to do is give it away. And
All right.